All right, update number 2. It's happening. We're putting the motor in the car finally. Not much has changed since you last saw. We've pretty much just, I've cleaned the inside of the 86 and that's about it. I cut this because, to be really frank, I cut that out. Just to be really honest, fitting that in without cutting it is very difficult, and it just makes it a lot easier. I'm doing a little bit of trial and tribulations. That way more people can understand what needs to be done to fit one of these in. And with that being said, we found a couple snags. I'll just point them all out to you real quick. Number 1, this little crossover pipe. Mine's all janky and bent because some wrecker decided to do that. This does hit right where that X is at. So if that X is right there, you're just gonna hammer that in, pretty much probably level it out so you got extra room, just that way it doesn't hit it. And then the other side of the neck, we'll go over to the motor. This guy hits. SQ Engineering does sell a flat one that brings that up close so it doesn't hit, but I obviously don't want to pay for that. So you can see I marked it right there. That you can see right there, and right there a little bit it hits as well. So I'll pretty much just hammer those both in just a little bit. A lot of people say that you have to hammer the crap out of the tunnel, but I, to be really frank, don't think that matters. I do have the down here. I do have the non-power steering rack conversion, and you can see it did hit a little bit here and here, but it's not bad. And that's only because when we were putting the motor mounts on the motor and setting it down in here, we just really couldn't get it to sit in there. And the reason that was because it was hitting up here on the firewall. And we found something else on the shifter, which I'll show you here in a second. But more or less, that was only hitting there because the motor was like without the actual mount, the new excessive motor mount was like this far away versus where it should be like here. So that's the only problem with that. But now, and then if you look back here, I didn't know this, but apparently I wanted to leave the stock shifter on here because it does bring the shifter location back quite a ways. And when you do that, everyone in 86 Corollas complains about the shifter being too far forward. So if you're trying to shift from first to second, third, say second to third specifically, you end up smashing your hand right into the stereo or something of the sort. So what you need to do is, we've found this out. This has these other holes farther forward. You pretty much just move that forward and then you drive the pin out. Where's the little rattle gun? I already drove the pin out. But more or less, you just flip this guy, because there is another pinhole on the back you can see. And then that'll slide on. Put your bolt back in. I'm not going to go all the way down just because we're not done yet. And then pretty much just set that on there. And now it's relocated farther forward. And I mean, it moves it forward, God, probably, I don't know, 2 inches roughly, give or take. So that gives you a lot more room. Now let's go look in the car. And you can see in the car, there is actually a spot where I have cut it. The factory bolt holes are roughly like right here. So I've cut it all the way back to here, pretty much right at this reinforcement spot of the chassis. And when I first put it up in here, the hole was for the shifter would have been like right about here, which was too far back. So now I think it'll be just about right about here. We'll find out here in a moment and we'll give you an update. All right, we got the motor in. We had to bash the firewall. Where's that light? We had to bash the firewall a little bit. You can kind of see down there, if it'll focus, kind of where we've been bashing, somewhere in this general area right here. And then there's a little bit more farther down that we need to do some more bashing on, but as you can see, like to that right there, it is very close. It's actually quite nice how well it fits. A lot of guys have issues with the oil filter not fitting quite right, but I don't think I'm gonna have that issue. If I run the bigger filter, then it will. You're gonna want also, like I said, to cut this, but as you can see, once we relocated the shifter, I just need to pretty much cut this little lip a little more. I don't have to go much more, and then that should fit right up in there about right, which is really rewarding. It does relocate it quite a bit, so that'll be nice for not smashing my hand on the stereo. Hey, shut up! What else? Yeah, just, you know, manipulation of the firewall. You can't really see back in there too awfully well. A couple of little things too to go over. You have to do the different fuel system, which will be more or less this would normally have a fuel pulsation device from Toyota. That I took one of the end plugs and put it there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed my fuel in right here. And then I'm going to have my return come out, and it's going to go to a separate, or I could do it down to here. Like I could do this one feeding up over into there, and then this could be my return out, and then that could circle around, and then I could come over here to a fuel pressure regulator. So along those lines, that's one unfortunate thing, is you have to do that because these are return-less fuel system factory. What else? Obviously I removed all the accessories like the power steering and the AC. What's really rad is the alternator is already on that side. You can buy a relocation kit that kind of sucks the alternator up and gives you a lot more extra room, but at the same time it fits fine. I don't really need to do anything, and it's cool too because at factory it comes with its own belt, so you don't have to find a custom belt or anything. I did do excessive motor mounts, and they fit really well. As you can see here, I have got, let's see if I can get a better look here. I've got tons of room to my steering shaft. It all fits pretty well. The only problem is the header does kind of shoot directly towards it, so that's not going to work. I will have to do something separate with that. That's not a big deal. Everyone runs into that problem. Alright, welcome back. It's been like a whole week, give or take. We finally got the motor completely mounted in. Brett is not with me right now, but I can still kind of run over everything that I've done and the trials and tribulations that I was kind of mentioning prior to. The engine is in, completely mounted now. It's not going to move from its location. I was able to get the fuel hoses done yesterday. Let's see. I found out some sweet little details on wiring. I am going to be doing the wiring myself. I'll do a little write-up on that too. More or less, where I had kind of pointed out in the previous video, how to kind of hammer somewhere in that range, kind of get it to move out a little bit more. Same on the exact other side, kind of where all of your fuel lines and everything. I would show you, but you cannot see down there. But pretty much right where, it's kind of loud, let me turn this down. Kind of right where all of your fuel lines and brake lines and everything come down the firewall and then shoot to the back of the car. Right in that area, you have to hammer that out, and then you kind of have to move your fuel lines and everything over, just so that way you're not pinching them in between the transmission. Now, like I said, this is completely mounted. Like, this is how it's going to sit. This is with a 1-inch spacer kit, as well as the excessive motor mounts and transmission mounts. You've got, this is like the final where it's gonna sit. I will make a little, cover to go over this and then kind of build something up to make it look a little bit better. I kind of like how it sits a little higher, just because that'll bring your shifter up a little bit, so you don't have to do some crazy lift on your shifter, or some extension, excuse me. But more or less, that's really straightforward. You don't have to do much. I had mentioned the oil filter issue. There are 2 different oil filters that you can run. Both Toyota. I wouldn't suggest anything but Toyota. You can either run a F1, which is the same length as this, or an F2. And the F2 is going to be pretty much up flush against that lip. Now, when you run that one, obviously you have more capacity, which is better in some cases, but you can get away with running the small one. And I know that's what they run from the factory. So let's see, what else have I done? I did go through the engine bay and completely repaint it. Fuel lines. This is what I found the easiest. For those of you that don't know what a fuel pulsation dampener does, more or less, the easiest way to explain it is, for every click of your injector, you have a pressure rise and drop. So what this does is all the fuel pressure coming in, is it evens it out. That way you're not losing or gaining too much pressure, because your injectors and everything are opening and closing. So that is something that you still kind of want to have on your engine. It does help them run a little bit better. I have noticed a huge difference on like the 4AGs, for example, without it. Some guys will argue that, but that's okay. This is all AN line. I just got, if you're curious what the actual thread pitch is for the fuel rail, it's 12 by 125 or 12 by 1.25. Obviously I just got the, this is all Aeromotive, I think. It says on here. Aeroquip, excuse me. Aeroquip fuel line. It is ethanol safe because eventually I'm going to end up running a standalone ECU on this with ethanol, just to gain a little bit more power out of it. But more or less, this line will shoot straight down, and it kind of wraps under right here, you can see, and comes straight in, or excuse me, comes straight out of your fuel filter. That right there is just another 12 by 1.25 adapter to AN. This is all -6. So this comes this way, feeds the back of the rail through the pulsation dampener. You always have to make sure that if you are going to use a pulsation dampener, it feeds in through the side of the banjo bolt. And then the actual part that threads in goes into the rail. If you do that backwards, it obviously won't work. And then you have this coming out, your fuel line coming out, which will go to your actual regulator. Now, you can do a couple different things on the beams motor. This is covered by many people, but more or less factory, it is a returnless fuel system. I had already mentioned that. So in other words, I'm turning it back into, or not back into, excuse me, I'm turning it into a return fuel system to match the 86 Corolla chassis. Oh yeah, before I forget to, whenever you do this, you more or less want to make sure that you're using a true GTS chassis, mainly because one, the fuel tanks are better. You already have an in-tank fuel pump. If you're doing this swap into a SR5, you're going to want to do either custom fuel lines all the way up to the front, or do GTS fuel lines with the GTS fuel tank, mainly because, well, the fuel lines factory on an SR5 are really teeny tiny, and they just don't supply enough fuel to run a EFI engine. Some people get away with it, but the beams will not handle it, especially because these things are really picky. You have to run right at the 62 psi mark, and if you don't, then you're going to run into fuel starvation issues, and this thing will never run right. It'll just run really, really lean. So what I did is I ran this through all -6 down into a Fuel Lab fuel pressure regulator. I really like Fuel Lab products. If you've never ran one, this thing is bulletproof. I got an auto gauge on there. You're gonna run this guy at about 62 psi. And then I didn't do any fancy line coming out the bottom of it. I just legit did a I think 5/16 barb, because this is 1/4" line, and this is ethanol safe as well. And then this will just pretty much loop back into the factory. I'll grab some light for you. Into the factory. You can see it just below there where that hose clamp is at. Into the factory return. That way it just goes right back around, and now you have a returned fuel system. So just to touch on the ECU box situation too. Whenever you wire up your own beams in your 86 Corolla, you need to get yourself one of these, which is a ECU box out of either an Altezza matching chassis to the beams motor, or you can get one out of an Aristo. Now, what's really cool about getting them out of either or you can also get them out of the US spec IS300. However, the US spec IS300 will not have the same connectors that you need for that. And the reason I'm telling you that is because this is what you end up finding out later on when you're trying to do your wiring yourself. Now, like I said, this should fit your ECU factory, so it'll just drop right in like so. And then more or less, this will fit in to that little groove there. That will fit in there perfect. And then there's another section to this that I have out right now, which is right here, because I'm starting my wiring more or less. But these two connectors, which is so crazy, these are for an Aristo 2JZ. They still fit the beams ECU. And here's the thing, these are chassis side. So if you get an ECU box that does not have the chassis side harness coming out of it, you're gonna have to get your own connectors. which is where you can have some made, which I had already done. What's nice about it is you can have a, as I drop them, you can have a OBD2 connector created for you as well. This thing is just not wanting to focus right now. Come on. There you go. OBD2 connector. That way you can kind of plumb this directly next to, or like do it somewhere right around there. You can do a dongle to where you can have a separate, like a iPad or something like that inside your car to see all your stats from your engine, which is really cool. But this is more or less just a flying lead that I had created, and this will pretty much be all of your power supplies as well as grounds, a couple other leads too, like say circuit opening relay and stuff like that. Now, like I said, these are specific to the Beams ECU. They do plug in right here and right here. And more or less, without these, you cannot give your ECU power. So you have to have these either created for you, or if you come across, and I didn't know this, an Aristo box. The Aristo box has the same exact connectors for the ECU power. You just have to make sure that you properly splice them. As you can see, clicks right in. This has only got this little guy on here because it was used for, it had a fuel cut defender put on it from the 2JZ. Now, how do I know the one from an Aristo 2JZ works? Well, because everybody and their mother, especially here in Colorado, if I could just get this damn thing out, they all end up buying Aristo 2JZs to put it into their 240s and what have you, right? Well, they don't need this ECU box. Well, they do, but most of them will buy a standalone harness. And if they buy a standalone harness, you don't need the ECU box, so that means they're just sitting around. So I found that there's 5 or 6 of them just hanging out. Yeah, sorry, my camera shut off there. But yeah, like 5 or 6 of them just hanging out, and most of the people willing to just give them away. So there you go. Like I said, you can still source one from an IS300, but it will not have the correct ECU connectors. If you're looking for the ECU connectors, most of the guys that make them, like Panic Wire or Mark Panic, I'm sure he can make you one to fit as well. That's be a universal wiring harness, I guess you could say, a flying lead, or if I can remember his dang name, the guy that made me mine, which is Justin Collins, I think is his name. I can find out his info really quick here. Yeah, Justin Collins from QFab, if it'll focus on that there. Maybe, maybe not. There you go, QFab, Justin Collins. And he made the little adapter harness flying lead that you have just seen, this guy here. So yeah, and he even sent me a little pinout on it too. I'm sure he'd do that for about anybody. He does do full budget harness setups too, to swap directly into 8.6. And he'll also obviously sell them all separate. So yeah, and then when you get this thing mounted in there, it will clear. This is covered in quite a few videos. It will clear the rack and pinion if you have a manual rack. If you have a power rack, it will not fit. You're gonna have to cut the oil pan. There's some like fittings at the very back of it. I can maybe get some light down here so that you can see what I'm talking about. Let me try here. I'm getting too old for this stuff, tell you what. Yeah, like I said, you can see here the excessive manufacturing tranny mount. And it kind of sits pretty centered up there. But as I come under here, you can see just how close that sits. That's how close it is. Now, if you have the power steering rack, it is much bigger than this, and the lines will hit. They will definitely hit. You might be able to see what I'm talking about right here. Yeah, there we go. You can kind of see how close those fuel lines, let me try and focus it on it. See how close those fuel lines get right there? You kind of have to move them away a little bit. Now, here's something else really cool too that I found out. This factory clutch reservoir line, slave line, depending on if you get it with it, it will legit just fit right onto the factory location right there. This guy right here. That guy. And what's so cool about that is, like I say, I have my factory one right here. I have heard that those two are interchangeable. I'm not positive on that. I haven't tested it yet, but they do look very identical. If that is the case, then I might just use that. But at the same time, this one is on there. It should be just fine. And I know that that fitting is going to be the exact same as that fitting. And I know that they will fit just fine, which is super rad. So yeah, there we go. I'm trying to think of anything else I might be forgetting. Yep, I forgot one other thing, which is throttle line. You know, the throttle, you do have to have a, non-cruise control throttle cable. One thing that I'm finding is there is really no way to mount it on the factory one. As you can see, I have it just kind of in there. So I'm gonna have to make a custom bracket. I don't know how I'm going to do that just yet. I'll give you more updates when I figure that out. I'm planning on just using these factory little holes and kind of running one down and over that'll hold it pretty much in the upright position like so. Something like that. And if that doesn't work, I'll maybe run it underneath the throttle or the intake system, because that could work too, I think. It's kind of difficult to get to it. So what I do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm actually going to run it down through the intake plenum, underneath the intake plenum, and then come up underneath. There's actually a bolt down in there that I can get this bracket that I made and put that on there, and that should hold it. Alright, I'm about halfway into making this bracket, and you can see how I kind of have it sitting there. I was able to remove the throttle body, which is pretty cool too, because this is a metal gasket, so it is reusable. So you can just pull that off of there. There's a little hose underneath it you can kind of see, as well as this other one, which feed the throttle body with coolant. And there's actually a bolt right back there. Alright, got it all taken care of. You can kind of see it down there. It's pretty simple. It actually works a little bit better this direction. The only issue is it's kind of, you know, up and down like that. This is like the factory holder, so I might just relocate it to like right here to hold it down. And that should actually work out quite well. Now, that's not really too much of a bend on it over here. I kind of played with it a little bit to try and see if it was going to be too tight, and it felt pretty good, so I like that. It's a little tucked down, out of the way, out of sight, out of mind, but it works great. The only real thing that sucks is the spring tension on the throttle is quite stiff, and you can definitely feel it through the pedal, but it works, and I'm happy with that. So I'm not gonna change really anything, I don't think, but works pretty good. Heck yeah. Also, I got this bracket fabbed up here that kind of holds onto the ECU box. So it's just kind of right there with a little bracket that goes on the back there to kind of help hold it. I don't have any of the bolts in the bottom right now, but it's in there pretty good. I mean, clearly, since it's not bolted down, it's pretty loose, but you know, I'm pretty happy with that. It fits quite nice, quite nice. I'm gonna try and put a Odyssey battery right here, because I really don't want to relocate my battery. So you can get the little Odyssey batteries that are like 3" by 7". It should fit right there. I kind of measured it out and set this pretty much right where it would fit. So when I get that battery, I will see if it'll fit, and then finish up everything else. That's about it. Obviously, I just have wiring to do now, as well as the battery. That kind of goes hand in hand. And then I can probably test run this thing. Pretty excited. So keep posted. But as of right now, I hope that's a pretty decent amount of info. And like I said, I will do a full write-up, or at least a how-to on wiring. You also have to wire up your own oxygen sensor, because the factory oxygen sensor for the beams on manual transmission is off the body side harness from the Altezza. So therefore, you have to wire that in yourself too. But yet again, it's not very difficult, as long as you have the connectors. So, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just let me know. I don't think I'm going to be able to get a lot of videos out really fast, but at the same time, you know, it's a budget build. I'm just trying to build this based practically off of what parts I have left over from the Cressida and other stuff like that. So you also have to do something different with the wire harness with the exhaust manifold. The exhaust manifold will not fit because it does hit the steering rack. So you can do some cool builds or have it custom fit. I don't know where to put it. Have it custom fit to where they can do like 2 separate pipes that shoot down, and then you can collect them down lower. That's an option as well. So I can't forget that. But like I said, thanks for watching. We'll give you an update here in the next couple weeks.